off here, and his or her head chopped off. It's, but I blame, no, that's too strong a word. I wish the administration would step up more than it has to try to find ways to be more responsible, be more adult with respect to China. And I wish China would do the same.
Terry, should we, could we?
Well, I would hope that we could. I've always been a free trader, but I recognize it's a very challenging issue these days. Of course, Max Baucus and my senior senator, Chuck Grassley, are very good friends. They work together on a bipartisan basis on a lot of these issues. We need more of that to try to get things accomplished. Senator Grassley was just reelected to an 8th term, and he's very sharp and he works very hard to represent our state. And we're a state that's very dependent on exports. So, and China is a huge trading partner. They're the second biggest economy in the world, and Americans love the quality and affordability of Chinese goods, and the Chinese people love the safety and the quality of American food. So we have some things that we have in common, and we're interdependent on each other, and we need to find a way to try to work these things out.
Iowa aside, is there a constituency left in the Republican Party to support granting the president authority to negotiate entry into the CPTPP?
No.
Okay.
Say that answer. Wait, who said that?
That was Max that said that.
You can't answer for the Republicans. He's the Republican.
Well, I'm gonna tell you though, he and Chuck Grassley are pretty close friends, and so I think, and his wife used to be a prosecutor in Des Moines, Iowa. So he has a pretty good knowledge of the situation, and I would concur it's a very difficult situation today. There are still many of us who have built friendships in China. My first year as governor, I signed a sister state agreement with Hebei province. And we have built friendship, which has led to trust, and that has gone a long ways to encouraging exchanges and all of those kind of things that I think could be very helpful. But it's very difficult today, and I think COVID has really hurt this. Not only have we had worldwide a lot of deaths related to COVID, but it's really interrupted travel. And now with China still having significant quarantine, it makes it much more difficult. And those trips and building those relationships, I think, is critically important to the relationship between our two countries.
The last panel was true that Pin moderated was truly magnificent. That Kurt Gibbs, Dolly Young, and John Holden are really three of America's greatest experts on China, and they really talked about China in a way that I wish all of America could hear and all of China could hear. It really was fabulous. Now, Max and Terry, you have served in China. Obviously, we've talked about censorship. So let's say CCTV suddenly came to you guys and said, okay, we're going to give you a platform, but it's only a 60-second platform to address the Chinese people. What would you say?
Well, the first thing I would say is I love the Chinese people. Max has already talked about this, but they have a great work ethic. They're very committed to education to their children, and they're very family oriented, and they treat you very well. In fact, I had the great honor of when I got to China and had a press conference, Xi Jinping saw it, and when I presented my credentials, he said, because my daughter was teaching at the International School of Beijing, and her husband and two granddaughters, he invited my wife and I, my whole family that was in China, to have dinner with him and his wife, Madam Peng, and their 25-year-old daughter. That was really one of the highlights of my time in China, to have that person.
And your press conference was broadcast in China?
Well, he saw it, so it must have been.
That doesn't, I'm not sure, but okay.
There were international media there, and there were Chinese media there, And Xi Jinping, a couple weeks later, when I presented my credentials, said he'd seen
All right, but this is uncensored. You're talking to the Chinese people. What do you think? Or you love them? What else?
it. I love the Chinese people, and like Max, I wanted to go to every province and autonomous region in China. I got to 26 of the 31 before COVID shut down travel. But it's a beautiful country, and the people are very friendly, very hospitable, and the sister state of Hebei, I was treated like a rock star when I go there, because they knew I was the governor that signed the sister state agreement, which led to all the exchanges and all of the activity over nearly 40 years between our two countries, between that province and the state of Iowa.
Max.
Well, much the same. Tell Chinese how much I love the job representing the United States in China. Love the job because people are wonderful, and we so depend upon each other, and people are people. I remember once, I'll try to keep this short, but I was one of these meetings, SND, basically US versus one side of the table and China the other. Secretary Pritzker was leading the American delegation, and Leo He on the other side, and I think Fang Xinghai was over there too. Anyway, it came down to the US fourth, and everybody was saying the same thing. Came down, just formal talkers. I hated it. Just reading meant talkers. You know, my crack staff gave me these great talkers, but they were just formal talkers. And so finally, I decided I had it. So I put them aside, and I look around this room, about the same size, about 200-300 people in this room. I realized nobody in this room has ever run for public office. No one. And I've run 18 times primaries and generals. And a lot of people give me an earful about what they think. Some like what I do, some don't like what I do. And I've learned two things in all those elections. What's that? Number one, I said that the people are all alike. Chinese people are just like American people. We all have the same hopes, dreams, and desires. We care about decent incomes, food on the table. We care about our kids, education of our kids. We care about addressing pollution, air and water, decent health care. We're the same. People are people. There's no real difference here. You have to remember that. And second, I've learned in all these years that people are pretty smart. They kind of get it after a while. The old Abraham Lincoln thing, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but not all the time. And so when we're here talking about SNED and this and so on and so forth, let's remember why we're here. We're here for the people we're representing, Americans and Chinese people. I finished, I couldn't believe it. Everybody on the Chinese side, huge big grins, erupted in spontaneous applause. And I asked myself, I looked at the American side, they had no idea what's going on. And I asked myself, what's going on here? What happened? And I realized later that it happened. I was speaking directly to each other, not condescending, not talking down, not lecturing, telling what to do, etc. We were just talking about, hey, who we are really. And I think that's an approach that is critical. Americans still tend to be condescending, still tend to talk down a little bit. That's my experience. And we got to stop that because we're all in this together. We're people with people. And so what I would say to Chinese people is just that. We Americans, we're people. We have some of the same concerns you have, your kids and grandkids and health and so forth. So let's just keep talking about how we put some of that stuff together.
Let me ask you to put on your policy hats. You know, we have obviously strategic tensions, military tensions, economic tensions, disagreement over each country's treatment of their own citizens. What areas are left for cooperation?
Well, trade is certainly important, and we're interdependent. We American consumers appreciate the quality and affordability of the Chinese products, and the Chinese people appreciate the safety and the quality of American products, especially the food products. So we have that in common. Also, when we get to know each other much as Max has said, we find we have a lot in common. We care about our families. We have a great work ethic. In many cases, I say that Chinese have a better work ethic than we have. I grew up on a farm and, learned to have a good work ethic at an early age, but that's really important. Commitment to education. All of those things we have in common. And that's the reason why I think we can work out a lot of these differences. Obviously we have political systems that are dramatically different. But when you get down to the people care about the same things. They want to have a good quality of life. They want to have good income for their families. They want to have health care. They want the environment to be protected and all of these kinds of things. So those are things that we have in common, and we need to find ways to work out our differences where we can. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that. The key is to have the meetings and the conversations. Max and I both participated in the Morfar meeting, which I think this is something that was initiated by, Morfar is a group that was started many years ago, I guess, for a conversation between Chinese leaders and American leaders, and Hank Greenberg put this together. And he wants this to help be a catalyst to kind of move us up from which has been a low point in our relationship and improve the opportunities for us to work together.
Max, areas for cooperation.
Well, first, and I said this earlier, we got to stop criticizing each other. Stop it. Stop it. And then that'll open up space. Negative criticism, closer. It's not over. You gotta just stop all name calling back and forth. And some of it's kind of subtle. Second is stand up Americans, stand up in deeds as well as words. For example, some think President Biden says he adheres to the one China policy, but on the other hand, there's lots of actions in not only administration, but some of the Congress take which kind of push up against the tripwire. So you wonder, is he really believing in one China policy in deeds as well as words? I mean, you gotta be honest and correct with what you're doing. So that's, for words there's space. Your prior panel talked, I missed most of it, about COVID. Man, if we could find a way to help provide Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and other ways to help China deal with COVID, my sense is it's going to be a huge problem when China opens up as much as it wants to, because so many people not sufficiently vaccinated, healthcare system, infrastructure, healthcare system in China, its infrastructure is a little bit deficient. But if we can help, that sends so many positive signals. They need help, people need help. It helps the relationship. And a third, the real danger is if China opens up and there's big explosion of COVID cases, there could be new variants. We can move more toward a pandemic of a different kind. So it's critical for the United States to do what it can to help China deal with COVID.
That really raises an interesting question. Was the Chinese government wrong in not licensing the production of mRNA vaccines or allowing for the import of those? We don't know. I think Professor Young talked about it, I think very articulately. We don't know what's going to happen the next 4 weeks. This is not 4 years. This is 4 weeks. We're going to see an explosion of COVID cases. What the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations talked about in its healthcare dialogue 6 months ago was this is entirely predictable. But one of the ways to mitigate and allow for an opening up was to import, whether it's Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, J&J, just import those and at least vaccinate the over 65 population. I think the three of us are all over 65, but they didn't. Was that wrong?
I think it was wrong, and I think part of the problem has been just China's unwillingness to be very open and candid about the situation. I was the ambassador when COVID started in Wuhan. In fact, it was during, we were on vacation in New Zealand during the Chinese New Year, which is what a lot of Chinese did as well. And that made it a worldwide pandemic, but I kept hearing from my staff back at the embassy, things are getting worse and you gotta get back, they're gonna close down. You know, I'm the chief of the mission and I need to be there when we make the decision. And soon we started what they call voluntary departure and then mandatory departure if you had children under 21. We sent 1,300 people back to the United States. And I'm proud to say that even after we did that, about 20% of the Americans stayed and worked, and we never had a COVID case, and we got a lot of PPE and medical supplies sent to the United States to help when the situation became worse in the United States.
Max, the mRNA, they didn't import it.
Well, it's interesting. When COVID-19 broke, I naively thought, what a great opportunity for the United States president to lend out a hand to China and say, hey, let's figure out how we can help you with the COVID that's developed here, and not call it the Wuhan virus or the Communist Party virus. That was just inane, stupid when we American president did that. So I'm not going to get into whether it's a mistake or not. I am going to get into what do we do now. And I had breakfast with Pastor Qin Dong a couple days ago, and I pressed him on this point. And I hope he gets here quickly, because so we can have a discussion with him on how on the best way to deal with the virus and new vaccines and with Sinovac or Western vaccines. Because I think it's critical that we spend a lot more constructive time and effort to figure out how to deal with it.
I don't know if this is correct. My understanding is that the president did offer mRNA vaccines to the Chinese government, and that was not accepted. Which, I don't know if that's the case, but if that's true, it's hard to accept.
Well, from the get-go, we had people from the CDC that were at the embassy and were offering help, but they won't return the phone calls. So, you know, from the get-go, when COVID started, we wanted to assist and provide help, but it didn't, you know, we got no response. And that's not untypical of what happens when you have some kind of a disaster or difficult situation between our two countries. They tend to just clam up and not respond. And that was a great disappointment because I think, you know, I think the other thing that I think the president at the time was very disappointed that he felt he was misled into believing they had things under control when indeed they didn't, and things became a worldwide pandemic.
See, a poll came out this morning, which none of you would be surprised by, which had very negative views by the American population of China. I asked you, you had 60 seconds on CCTV. Let's assume you have 60 seconds to address the American people. And some of this, I think the previous panel talked about misunderstanding, which is partly, not entirely, which is partly the root of the problems in U.S.-China relations. So you have 60 seconds, and Terry, one of the things that was so interesting about this poll was Republicans are much more negative and hostile towards China than Democrats and independents. So you've got, let's say you're at a meeting of the RNC, you got 60 seconds, what do you say?
Well, I don't think you're going to turn them around in 60 seconds. I don't think you're going to turn anybody around in 60 seconds. But I would just talk about my personal experience with the Chinese people. Going back to signing the sister state, hosting Xi Jinping, and he calls us old friends because we treated him so well, and say, you know, yes, we have some real big differences with their policies and with their government, but we also need to recognize they are the second biggest economy in the world next to us, and they have a growing middle class. They need the safety and quality of American food. We need, and American consumers want the quality and the affordability of the Chinese consumer goods. So let's work to try to avoid the ongoing conflict and look for opportunities to cooperate.
You couldn't do it in 60 seconds. Could you do it in 5 minutes?
I doubt
That's
it.
fine.
Well, I don't think you're going to turn it. Well, you've got these opinions that have been built over a period of years.
So how do we turn this tide?
Well, I think you work at it day in and day out, and if we can get this reopened where we can have more trips back and forth, that's what I found really worked in Iowa because of the sister state relationship, because of the number of Iowans that went to China, because of the number of Chinese students and Chinese people that came to our state. We became friends, and that built a level of trust. And obviously when you go years where things are closed down and you don't have those exchanges, it erodes some of that important relationship and trust that you need to have.
Max, you got an easier time. You're at the DNC, but you still only have 60 seconds.
No, I'm going to talk to the American people. First, I explained, having lived in China, the Chinese people are wonderful. There's wonderful people. You know, I know what I'm talking about. They'll live there and give examples and experiences and so forth. Second, it's a bit difficult. What I'd say is stop watching Fox News. Fox News is terrible on this subject. And it is every news commentator has something negative to say about China. And then I try to say, I would say, it's hard to get this next point across, but unfortunately, most members of Congress are playing, Chinese policy in America is driven by domestic politics. It's the president, members of the House and Senate don't dare say anything positive about China. They get reelected by saying things negative about China, to be honest about it. And so I've tried to talk to a lot of members of Congress, the administration, they can't lighten up a little bit here. Because, you know, this is important, we get along better together. It's very hard to do. But the more I say American people, remember that's what, a lot of what you hear is being driven by domestic politics. And a lot of Fox News and other social media sites make it difficult. It reminds me, my father had said to me a long time ago, says, Max, don't believe everything you read, only half of what you hear. And people, we don't have enough, we're losing our ability in America for critical thinking. We're too short-term in America, so we accept negative news more easily than we may have 30 years ago. And a lot of negative stuff is about the U.S.-China relationship. Now that's a long answer, but I would just say, number one, try to shorten it, say, look, Chinese people are wonderful. They're wonderful, believe me. And second, be careful of the sources where you get your news. Ask where you're getting your news. And it's hard to do this. I'll try not to be too philosophical about all this. But it kind of reminds me, what's the future of America? What's the future of America? I mean, countries and civilizations come and go. You speak of history, Greeks, Romans, and so forth. So what's the future of the United States? There's no guarantee the United States is going to continue to always be who we are 1,000 years from now. There's no guarantee. So what are the things we can do to help prolong the United States growth and development? There are two things in my judgment. One is an educated electorate. You gotta know what's going on. You can't just believe what the next person says. That's hard work. Democracy takes a lot of hard work. And to know what's going on, you gotta dig into it, find out, read newspapers, and read them critically. Ask what is that really right? Is that not right? That's number one. The more and more people just think critically and get good information. By good, I mean just Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, South China Morning Post. Read it all. Find out what you believe in. That's condition number one. Condition number two is then do something about it. Don't just sit here crying in. Stand up. Say what you think and believe. Because that's what democracy is. I know this is corny. We in government are just the hired hands. We're working for the people that elect us. And we need our marching orders, the people elected us. And if the marching orders are good, by good I mean thoughtful, and they're going to tend to tell us what we should be doing, elect the right people and so forth. So anyway, I just urge, I would say, be a good citizen, read what's going on, trust your own instincts, don't just read what the next person says, and then I think that'll help the relationship a lot. And as has been said here, boy, once the quarantine's lifted, travel back and forth is going to help a lot.
What about visas and immigration? I think America to some degree has lost sight of the fact that we were built by immigrants. This city was built, we're sitting in Chicago, the city was built by immigrants. I live in New York City, city built by immigrants. The difficulties today, not only have a reduction of Chinese students in the United States, but the difficulty for some to stay. I was with a company that sets up offices in London because people can immigrate there more easily. So rather than bringing these people to New York or Chicago, the Indians and the Chinese are going to London. It breaks my heart when I hear that. I understand why they're making that decision, but we've lost sight of who built this country, and it's heartbreaking. This group in the audience are obviously subsidiaries of Chinese companies. The U.S. government is the federal government is putting lots of barriers in the way for them to invest here, for them to operate here, for them to sell their products. What do you say to them about the future for those businesses in the United States?
Well, the first thing I would do is say be careful and abide by the laws and regulations so you don't get in trouble. And I would say that to the American businesses doing business in China as well. You need to recognize the laws and regulations, and you've got to live by it whether you like it or not. That's critically important. And obviously, because of the mistreatment of the Uyghurs, there's been significant legislation involving Xinjiang. You've got to be careful to make sure you're not using labor that is restricted because of the legislation. And so those kinds of things. I just think Matt said he was elected 18 times, both primaries and general elections. I was elected 20 times. But I served in state government, not in the U.S. Senate. But I found that Iowans like their leaders to be humble and hardworking and accessible and available to the people. And so, as governor, I went to every county every year. It was a great way to really hear directly from people what they really thought. And when I went to China, I wanted to do exactly what Max did and go to every province. And I got to 26 of them before COVID shut it down. But the other thing that I think we need to know on the Chinese side is a lot of their policies are driven by domestic situations as well. And so, the Chinese Communist Party controls the education system, they control the media, and so they can feed the Chinese public what they want. Now, I think, that's a challenge.